moving to Phoenix,
Hmm? Yeah, I know.
Robinson.
Well, it's probably a good move. He's, what, mid-80s now, isn't he?
Late 80s.
Late 80s.
Yeah, all right, let's get started. So here we're doing the laws of the holidays. On the Yom Tov, the holidays. So there's what's called Shvisa, which is resting on Shabbos. You also have to rest on the holidays. These are biblical laws. Some of them are rabbinic origin, but you have to rest on the holidays. You're not allowed to work on the holidays. Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot, you're not allowed to work the first 2 days and the last 2 days. But in between, you're allowed to do some type of work. Pesach, you're not allowed to work the first 2 days and the last 2 days. And Shavuos, you're not allowed to work for 2 days. And these are the laws of the holidays. So now, we're talking about different things. Now, you're not allowed to make fire on the holidays, just like Shabbos. Not from wood, not from stones, not from metal. You're not allowed to, use flint and rub things together, or the Rambam goes through all the different methods where essentially you're creating a spark which lights. You're allowed to take fire from an existing flame, but you're not allowed to strike a match or turn on a fire. So you can take it from a pilot, from a lit candle. A lot of people don't know, but yard set candles, their prime use is just so people have fire so they can light the second night of the holiday. So let's say Rosh Hashanah, Friday night this year, you can light from a match, but Saturday night you can't light from a match. You need an existing flame.
Right.
You can't.
Yeah.
So you need to have people sometimes have a stove or pilot or something to keep on. Okay. Even though you're allowed to light it. Okay, so now, so you're not allowed to create a new flame, right? But you can extend a flame, an existing flame. That's the law. Okay. Even though you're allowed to light up on the holiday not for a reason, you cannot put out a fire. So you're allowed to light it up for cooking.
Mm-hmm.
You're also allowed to light up because you want fire for whatever reason you want fire. In other words, you're allowed to extend the flame. However, you cannot put on a fire, even if you did it for because that's not necessary for eating. So you're not allowed to put a fire on the holidays. And just like you can't put a fire, similarly, you can't put out a candle. And if you do it, that is a malacha, and you would get lashes. Just like now on the holidays, you don't get death penalty like Shabbos. You get lashes. That's what the Torah says.
What's the reasoning behind putting out a fire?
It's considered work. You're not allowed to put out fire. You're not allowed to put out a fire. You're not allowed to put out a candle.
Can you create a pile of wood that you will then use to make a fire? That's work too. So the wood has to already.
No, you can make a pile of wood on the holidays, not on Shabbos. Shabbos you can't deal with fire at all. But on the holidays, you can make a pile of wood and then take an existing flame and light it up. So let's say if you want to barbecue on Shabbos, like a gas barbecue, on Yom Tov. On Shabbos you can't cook at all. But on Yom Tov, like a gas barbecue might be a problem because you're turning on a flame. On the other hand, a charcoal barbecue, right? You can take a flame from someone else and light up the coal and barbecue. Okay. You cannot take the mouth of a candle. You cannot, or you cannot remove. Let's say you have a candle, right? So you can't take the wick, move the wick around so it goes out, or you can't pour out oil so it goes out, right? And then you cannot cut the head of the wick. However, you can go and you can spread the wick with your hand, untie it. Okay, if you have a bundle of wood which was lit, bundle of wood, right, and it's lit, so you're allowed to take those sticks and move them, right? You're allowed to take those sticks and move them. Even it's not similar to we're not worried it's considered putting out. You can't put out a fire to save, the rule on Yom Tov as well as Shabbos, you're not allowed to put out a fire to save money. Just like Shabbos. So if your house is burning and no one's going to die, you have to let it burn. We're not worried about your money on Yom Tov or Shabbos. Rather, you leave it burning and you go out. And you can't put out a fire because, let's say, so the Jewish law is marital relations, they have to be done in the dark. You're not allowed to have light.
Always?
Correct. So let's say
not even on Shabbos during the week.
During the week, yeah, it has to be done.
No
in the dark.
light.
No light. So you cannot put out a candle, right? Rather, but you could put something on top of it, or you could make something that divides it, some device that will block out the light. That's something you could do, or you could take out the candle. And if you can't do any of these things, you can't put it out, and you can't have relations. All right. You can move a candle and it's lit, and we're not worried, oh, I'm walking around with it, maybe it's going to go out. Right? So, even though it might go out. Yeah, your question?
Well, this marital relations puzzles me. That would mean you can't have marital relations during the daytime.
Unless you make it really dark.
I mean, but real, what do they define as darkness?
Dark, you're not supposed to see each
Not
other.
supposed to see.
You're not supposed
What's
to see
the
each other.
reasoning?
I don't want to go into too much,
It just
but
seems to me
but
that,
if
you
you,
know-
but I'll tell you, Rabbi Manas Friedman talks about it. Actually, is interesting because that's Jewish law. Rabbi Manas Friedman says that should be moral law as well. Gentiles should also do that. So you can listen to him about it.
Shouldn't see your spouse.
Correct. So you can, if you listen to Rabbi Manas Friedman on his things about marital relations, he says there should be laws for Gentile as well.
It seems to me it flies. Judaism believes in celebrating life.
Yeah.
And this is life. You're creating life, celebration. So the eyes should be part of it.
Well, it's kind of the opposite, but I can tell you after. I'll do a little bit more around. Yeah. You can.
I guess modesty is absolute.
Well, the laws of modesty are actually very interesting, especially during marital intimacy. And the general gist of it is, when we have our Kabbalah class, we're actually going to talk about it in the first class. When we have our gist of it, it's kind of like when you see something, you define everything. And most of Judaism is not about seeing, it's about transcending your vision. So, trying to do something deeper than vision. It's like, how many times do people say, like, oh, this doesn't interest me, or whatever it is, Well, you don't realize when something doesn't interest you, that's your loss. That's not your gain, right? So when you are mixing your eyes into things, you have a gain that you can see things, but you also have a loss. You can't experience things which are beyond vision. So that's kind of the gist of it. Anyways, you cannot. Okay, so you could put a. You cannot put a light on top of a palm tree or things like that. Maybe you'll come to pull off the branches on the holidays. You cannot light up incense. You can't smoke up incense on the holidays because that's essentially putting out, even if you're doing it for scent. And for sure, you can't light up things to make the house smell nice. You're allowed to smoke underneath fruits in order that they should become tastier. So you can smoke things, just like you can cook things, just like you can roast things. And you can put a mustard in coals of metal, but not in coals of wood because that puts out the fire. And so you smoke up the mustard, I guess. And you can't put out a piece of wood in order that you shouldn't have smoke from it, from the cooking from the cooking above it. You cannot blow on a ember on the holidays. The way that professionals do it. They have those things.
Yeah.
But you can blow with a pipe. You cannot make coals, and you cannot make, you cannot, I guess, some process of advancing a wick to be bigger.
Twist a wick.
And you can't singe it, and you can't cut it to two pieces. However, you can mush it in your hand and have it soaking in oil and put it between two lights and light the middle one, and it comes out that you have two wicks, right, made out of one. Okay. You cannot break earthenware. Is that right?
Yeah, piece of pottery.
And you cannot cut paper to roast on top of it, and you cannot split a reed to make like a thing to a skewer. A skewer which becomes bent. You can't, even though you can fix it with your hands, you're not allowed to. Two vegetables which are connected in the beginning, like for example, two candles or anything like that, you cannot divide them into two because you're fixing a vessel. You cannot sharpen a knife with its sharpener. but you can sharpen it with wood or things like that. And you can't teach these things in public because people will end up doing it the wrong way. When do we say this? When cut. Uh, you can cut. It's hard to cut, or it's damaged. It has like a chip in it. However, if you're not able to cut it at all, you can't sharpen it even with wood because maybe you'll come to sharpen it with the proper tool to sharpen it. And because of this, the rabbi said you cannot show a knife to people on the holidays. They'll say you cannot shech with this. So here's the rule. The rule is when you slaughter something, it has to be perfectly smooth.
Right.
So people always ask to see the shochet's knife. They want to see if they're in the olden days. They want to see if the knife is good. So you cannot show the knife to a regular person because maybe it'll be damaged, and he'll say, "Oh, you cannot shech with it," and he'll go and sharpen it. But a wise person like a rabbi can take a knife and lend it to a regular person, and he'll assume that because the wise person knows he's not going to sharpen it with a he's not going to sharpen with a sharpener.
You can't slaughter an animal on the
Yeah,
Sabbath,
you can.
right?
On the holidays. On the Sabbath you can. On the holidays you can.
So he can't sharpen a knife
Hello.
on the holidays.
Hi, can I help you? Yes. How do you do? Yes. About 10 o'clock. Yeah. Yeah, sure. Who's me? All right, sure thing. Okay, let's just do one more lot. Yeah, you can do any malacha which food on the holiday. Although what you're seeing now, you can't sharpen certain craftsman things. You can't do like
On a holiday, forget Shabbat.
Yes, on a Shabbat you're not allowed to cook anything.
Right,
Yeah. Okay. You can't chop wood on the holidays, not with the axe and not with all these other tools, but you can chop it with a kufis. What's a kufis? Not sure.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It's like a kufis is like
Split, are we on split wood?
yeah, it's like
One may not split wood on holiday neither with an axe or a scythe or a saw, but rather only with a butcher's cleaver.
butcher's cleaver. Okay. Only on the narrow side, not on the wide side. And why did the rabbis not allow it? So you shouldn't do it the way you do on weekends because you could have chopped the wood. The things that were not allowed, like so let's say fire, we mentioned at the beginning. I kind of summarized it. You can't light fire because you could have had fire the day before and kept it. So anything that you could keep the day before, the rabbi said, and it won't taste better today. The rabbi said you cannot do. So fire, you can have fire from the day before. On the other hand, let's say, an animal is more fresh if you do it today, apparently, so you can do it on the day of.
But I assume that there are exceptions if the life is at stake. If somehow
Oh.
a person has no wood in the middle of winter.
Oh, if a life is at stake, then there's a lot of exceptions. That's even on Shabbos, but
Yeah.
we're talking about generally.
I know.
Yeah. So yeah, life is at stake. We don't stretch it. It just something I was thinking about lately that occurred to me is it's a crazy thing how throughout all Jewish history, the default was everybody kept Shabbos, 100%.
Yeah.
And now it's like the default. People assume like, oh, obviously you don't keep Shabbos, when Shabbos is like such a strict thing. So yeah, there is a lot of leeway in Shabbos where like you suffer for
By
Shabbos.
the same token, if your house is on fire and nobody's inside, you let it burn. But if it's right next to another house, you'd have to put
Yes,
the
so
fire.
that's a very interesting law, and we spoke about that in laws of Shabbos. It's actually a beautiful law of surrender. Beautiful law of surrender is here's an example of a guy who's $1 billion house with everything he owns in it, and the Torah says let it burn.
Huh.
You lose everything. What do you mean? How am I going to survive? How am I going to retire? It's like God's going to take care of you, So that's a beautiful. That shows the level of surrender we're supposed to have in the Torah. It's an incredible thing. Now there was in New York. I mean, there were also. I mentioned this before. There was a rabbi who said, "Oh, you can always put out the fire in the city." And he said, "Why?" He said, "Well, nowadays we have electrics in the wall, and it could cause an explosion, and all the houses are next to each other."
And gas. can
So
explode.
so he said nowadays, it's always in the old country you might have had houses that were separate from each other, and or you might have had a block with 10 people. You can get them all out of the house and let the whole thing burn down. But nowadays it's always a danger. So that's what he said, and there are rabbis who disagree with him, and
They disagree?
there are rabbis who disagree with him, and possibly even scientists who disagree. These are not clear-cut matters. So it depends. Hey, look, in New York, you have 1,000 people living in each building, but over here, in my town, there's single houses. There's only 7 houses. So and Jewish law says you're allowed to do certain things to prevent the fire, but generally we hold that we're allowed to put out the fire. But that shouldn't take away from our belief in our surrender, that God wants us to be willing to give up everything on a Shabbos. And the Jewish faith is like, oh, how will I survive? You'll be okay. You'll be okay. You're allowed to save 2 meals, however many meals left you have for Shabbos. You're allowed to take out.
So you can run in and save 2 meals, but
Yeah.
you can't run and take out the silverware.
Correct.
But would the rabbinic ruling be that if the fire in your house endangers your neighbor's house?
Yes, so that is the rabbinic ruling. In the old country, it seems like there were certain times where, like, to clear everybody out of the house and scream fire, everyone would run out. In other words, like, people didn't live until later on in history. People didn't live so close to each other and such big houses and everything like that. Nowadays, it's like you can scream fire. Maybe the guy won't even hear inside because he's inside a room, inside a room, inside a room. So generally speaking, nowadays people put out the fire right away, but that shouldn't take away from the fact that we don't care about. Like, in other words, the real law on Shabbos is if we could, we would let everything burn. So anyways, so why do the rabbis do this? Because maybe you will. Why do the rabbis not allow you? So the rabbis let you cut wood, but they don't let you cut wood with certain tools. They won't, because you could have done it before, right? So let you do it with lesser tools. So why didn't they say don't cut wood at all? The reason is maybe you'll find a dense piece of wood, and you won't do it, and you won't cook. And therefore they said you can cut it, but with a shinoi. With a shinoi means you cannot cut it with the regular tools.
So the point is, you can cut it, but it's going to be a lot more work. So
It's going to be,
time, think before.
think before, and also you'll only be able to cut small pieces.
Right.
And you'll make sure that you cook. And all these things, these are general rule of holidays. The rabbis kind of take a line. They don't want you to do extra. They don't want to do extra work, and they also don't want you not to eat food and not to cook and not to work. So those are the laws of holidays that we'll
So
do
it's
today.
basically, in some respects, it's quite wise in the sense that get your life together, think beforehand, and prepare. And if you don't prepare, if you really need to do something, maybe there's some loopholes, but it's going to be a lot more work.
Well, so the rule that we said yesterday was anything that will be better if you do the day of, you're allowed to do. So, like, let's say baking bread, it'll be fresh to now. The thing is like, you don't need a fire. Let's say anything that you will be able to do, let's say you don't need a fire to be lit today, right? So you can't light your oven, but you can keep your oven on, technically. We talked about that a couple days ago.
Yeah.
So the rabbi said anything you can do, like, so you can cook the day of, because it's more fresh and more convenient and more, but they didn't want you to overdo it and say, okay, well, I need a shop, I need to chop wood, I need to buy a new pot. They wanted to make sure all the things that could be prepared before are prepared.
Just one last question. If you have an oven and you set it at 150 to keep things warm, the oven goes on and turns off and turns back on automatically. That's okay?
So the problem with the oven is, the problem with the oven on the holidays, if you leave it on, is we said before that it makes the electrical system, there's a sensor inside. So when you open it, it makes the electrical system go on and to make the oven hotter.
Right.
So that's the problem. And I mentioned that there are ovens out there that have a Shabbat mode. American ovens, GE ovens, they have a Shabbat mode. And the purpose of that, and there could be other brands as well, it literally says Sab, like you press the button, it says Sabbath mode, like on the computer, yeah. And the purpose there is, I believe, twofold. The general gist is you don't want to keep it in your oven for 48 hours of the holiday, right? So you can set it, 1 o'clock we eat, so 12 to 1 every day it'll go off. It'll go on, right? So I can put my food in there before, and it'll cook it, right? And it'll go off at 1 o'clock. It'll
But
turn.
it turn on at 12.
It turn on at 12.
That doesn't break anything?
My food, it's on a timer. That's number one. And number two, it has a thing in it that blocks out the sensor on the holiday. So that is now that itself is controversial. It took
Sure.
GE a lot of tries to do it, and there was all sorts of controversy. I don't remember. I didn't really read on it, but I just saw this kosher agency said, "Hey, that's not right." Then another kosher agency said it'll right if you buy this extra piece and you plug it in, and this will reprogram this. And then I think it was different. It went through different kosher industries, the Star K, the CRC, and then finally I think it's under the OU now. But I think GE did it kind of off the books without any real rabbinic supervision, religious Torah, Jewish legal rabbis. And then eventually they got it right. So that is now, you can fry. You can't, this is an interesting thing. The best is to have a gas stove, even though that's becoming illegal in a lot of places. The best to have a gas stove. That's the best way to maneuver. Now, you can't turn it on Yantif. What you can do is you can turn it higher, but you can't turn it lower. You can turn it higher, but you can't turn it lower. But you can leave that on, and you can cook in a frying pan, and you can barbecue with coals. In other words, so as long as you're keeping it to the simple system, that you're not causing any sparks, you're not starting any fire, but you're keeping the simple system that you have a flame here and you're just moving the flame somewhere else, that's okay. And there's many laws of how to cook on Yom Tov.
Yeah, we have a grill that is actually connected to the natural gas in the house. So there's no temperature sensor in the,
So a grill can be okay. Now, you can't turn it lower, you can only turn it higher. Now, the
or
only
you
other
could just
thing
leave
is,
it set at a single point.
now the other thing is that igniters, so I'm not 100% sure, but let's say the igniter, if you turn on that igniter for a second, right? So that is turning on fire, even though it's the spark. So you have
But you
to
could
make
do that
sure.
before.
Well, you have to make sure. Well, you can leave the grill going on low, or leave the oven going. A lot of people do that. Leave the oven going the whole Shabbos and Yantif. They leave the top of the range, and then they put what's called a blech, and they have all sorts of different products. But so if you're turning on a barbecue, you could technically turn on the gas, light up the gas from a pre-existing flame. You just have to make sure that you're not turning on the igniter. There are different barbecues. Some barbecues you could not turn on the igniter, and some of them, some barbecues, the igniter runs on a battery. And you can even take the battery out to make sure you won't ignite it. And you're just turning on gas. So there are different ways of doing that. That's
I like the last phrase here. It says, in English, for the same reason they permitted what they permitted, and they forbade what they forbade.
yes. That's
That has to be something that's quoted.
well. So he's going through, and the Rambam is going to go through many different ways. The Rambam is going to go through many different ways of examples of this. That the rabbis had a very fine line. They wanted to make sure that you wouldn't do work which is illegal on Shabbat, on Yantif. At the same time, the Torah tells you can eat food, you can cook food on Yantif. The Torah says quite clearly, you can cook food, but the rabbi said there's a barrier. You can't just cook anything. You have to only cook certain things in specific situations. If you go further than that, so yesterday we mentioned you can make bread, but you can't make flour on Yom Tov. You can't grind wheat, because grinding wheat, it's not more fresh when you grind it the day of. So these are the different laws. Yeah. Okay, so let's finish off. I wanted to finish off this one on Shabbos, and next week we're going to start Bereshis.
Oh,
We're going to start studying Bereshis, yeah, because, Bereshis is starting in about 2 weeks,
Wow.
right? Yeah, interesting to know. Yes, so that was interesting that we got into the discussion about darkness in
Sorry, about what?
darkness in marital
Yeah,
relations.
okay.
So actually, I suggest you listen to Manas Friedman, because he actually takes it a step further. He says it's not just Jewish law; it's like literally will save marriages. That's what he says. Yeah, it literally will
Alright,
save
I'd like to
marriages,
see the logic.
and it's pretty logical. I don't want to
Okay.
go into it now. Okay. So what we explained last week is we were talking about how the rabbis were really expressing by the blowing of the shofar that when we don't blow it on Shabbos, and actually I gave a speech on it on the first day of Rosh Hashanah, we're actually blowing the shofar. The shofar scream is that it's Shabbos today. It's Shabbos. That is the scream. Shabbos is God's day. And then we said in the temple, there are different levels of arousing of Shabbos. In the temple, it's like we're totally with God. We're like God's absolute servants. We're not visiting God. Like Shabbos, we usually visit God for a day on Shabbos. But in the temple, we're like servants of God, and therefore we blow the shofar. So now we're going to go into it in a deeper way, and then we're going to finish off the Sikha on chapter 9. And let me see if I find it for you. Here.
I got it.
Okay, Besignan Achmer B'Eim Kaiser. We're going to go into a deeper way. You do achilak shmei mitzvah Torah. It's known the difference between mitzvahs and Torah. She mitzvahs hem tzivei laha adam. Eich lisnaig ba'elam. Mitzvahs are the commandment to the person how to act in the world, right? So, hainu sheyesh mitzvahs sha'adam ba'elam v'mitzvahs hem lahiris la'adam eich lisnaig ba'elam. This is what Steve Marcus asked me at Tashlach. I think it was you were saying. He said that He said you wouldn't consider it a mitzvah, but I consider it a mitzvah about something. So I said to him, well, who's the commander, right? Who's the commander? If there's no commander, there's no mitzvah. Mitzvah doesn't mean good deeds. Doesn't mean good things. It doesn't mean things that you think are good. A mitzvah means that there's a commander who asked you to do something.
Something directed you to do something.
Somebody asked you to do it. Somebody commanded you to do it. If there's no commander, then there's no such thing as a mitzvah, right? So, what is a mitzvah? A mitzvah is...
So what did Steve say?
Oh, he was saying a good deed. I said, no, a good deed is not a mitzvah.
He didn't have a
right?
response to that?
No, it's not a matter of argument. A mitzvah literally means a commandment,
I don't remember the...
Oh, I don't know if you were there with me. So he said, did I do a mitzvah? I said, it depends if there's a commander, right? So if there's a commander, then you did a mitzvah. If there's no commander, you didn't do a mitzvah. If you do... So this is a mistake people make sometimes. They'll be like, oh, I'm doing a good thing, tikkun olam or whatever it is. There might be some things which have commander, which God is the commander, and there might be something which God is not the commander.
But your response to Steve, I think, was that by itself, on the surface, it's not a mitzvah. But if you dig into the ramifications of what he did, you might find it falls under 1 or 2 or 3.
So it might be
right?
that there's a commander, exactly. In other words, when you do something good, there might be a commander, there might not be a commander, right? In order to do a mitzvah, you have to have God commanding. If God is not commanding, then by definition, there's no mitzvah.
If you see a homeless person and you give him a cup of soup, is that a mitzvah?
If you see a homeless person and you give him a joint, is that a mitzvah, right?
Let's stick to cup of...
The reason why I'm saying that is this something you have to ask yourself, am I giving tzedakah or not? Is this the tzedakah which God is referring to in the Torah or not?
Let's look
It's
at
very
it.
simple. If it is, then it's a mitzvah. If it's not a mitzvah, right? So now, let's say you give him drugs, right? You might be making him feel good. In the context, but it might not be a mitzvah. It might be a mitzvah. I'm not ruling out. If you give tzedakah to somebody, it might be a mitzvah, it might not. It is important to remember that when we're doing it for God. When we say Asher Kitchana b'mitzvosav etzivanu, right? You can only say that if you are commanded. If you are a Gentile and you want to hear the shofar, you can't make the blessing because you weren't commanded.
Let's look at it this way. We're talking about the difference between a good deed and a mitzvah. So the Boy Scouts had a creed which said, do a good deed every day.
Okay.
So you can follow that creed, but the higher authority is a earthly authority. It's the Boy Scouts of America organization. Mitzvah implies a divine authority.
Right.
So if you don't believe in a divine authority, you can't call it a mitzvah. You can call it a good deed, but mitzvah itself implies directly that the authority is a divine authority. So it's a misuse of the word and the concept.
I would agree.
All right. Yeah. So point
It's
number
like
one.
In the Army, if General Nevermore issued an order and there is no General Nevermore, what the hell, I'm not,
Well, so point number one, what we're saying here is a mitzvah needs a commander. Point number two, there has to be a commandee, a person, right?
Okay.
If there's no humans, then there's no mitzvahs. There's a commander, but in order to do a mitzvah, you have to be a separate person. You have to be a separate person. So, for the concept of mitzvahs, we have to be separate from God. If we are one with God, then God's not really commanding somebody. He's doing it himself, right? So a commandee has to be separate from the commander.
Right.
Take it a step further. If you don't have the ability not to do the mitzvah, then you don't need a mitzvah, right? If you don't have the ability to not do the commandment, then you don't need to be commanded. If you're automatically going to do the commandment, you don't need to be commanded.
Wait, slow down a
So
second.
if you have defeated your evil inclination,
Yeah.
so that your Jewish soul now, say in
Yeah.
the case of a tzaddik, or Moshe, is such a person doing mitzvot? then?
So he's not doing the mitzvah to the extent that someone who struggles with it, right? Someone who struggles with it, he needs to be reminded it's a mitzvah. Someone who does it automatically, so let's say take Shabbos. If you grow up in a Shabbos keeping household and everything like that, you don't necessarily feel that you're doing a mitzvah keeping Shabbos, right? But if you don't grow up not keeping Shabbos, every time you keep a Shabbos, you're like, wow, this is a big mitzvah. So mitzvah requires A, commander, B, a commandee, who is separate from the commander.
Right.
If he is not separate, now, when we say Asher kichanu b'mitzvaysav etzivanu, to hear the shofar, or to light the menorah, what we're saying is God commanded me to do this, right? That's what we're
Yeah.
saying. Okay, Masha'enkin Torah, on the other hand, Torah. So that's mitzvahs. Mitzvahs require a commander and a commandee, who is separate from the commander, who has his own identity. Masha'enkin Torah, Torah hi chamuda gnuza. Torah is God's secret treasure, special treasure, that Kadosh Baruch Hu Shalom Olam. God is transcendent from the world. U'meila gam b'dinei Torah mitzvahs k'yushem mitzvah Torah le'nigish mitzias adam v'olam ki im Torah mitzias adam v'olam eina ela kol shedinei ela kadei shedinei Torah is gam apal. When you're studying Torah or looking at Torah, the Torah does not focus on man's existence. The Torah is God's wisdom, right? So, and even the man's existence, which is found in Torah, is all in the context of Torah, right?
Right.
We're not focusing on your identity when we're studying Torah. We're focusing on God's wisdom. Even when we're talking about this world, the world is just a play out of God's Torah, right? When we're looking at the Torah and we're saying, oh, this is what the Jewish law says you have to do on Shabbos. Your Shabbos is just playing out what it already said in Jewish law before you existed. Okay. Now let's look at shofar. Mitzad geder mitzvah shofar tziv adam yesh mitzias adam v'olam. Tzarich lahachlias HaKadosh Baruch Hu l'melech al ha'adam v'olam al yidei tchiyah shofar. When you're looking at the human person, the human aspect of shofar, you have a job to blow shofar. You have a job to crown God as king. V'meila nergeshes mitzias adam v'olam. There has to be humans to blow shofar to announce God as king, right? If there's not humans, if we don't do it, then it won't happen. Al mitzad Torah, but however we're looking at the Torah, zela hifak. Shekem shal bertzeni zbach shach tasar tia adet kil shofar. L'chein nice apul tkeshav u'meil hanigesh mitzvah adam va'elam kevan shekol inyanim eina ela al shal yadim iskayim bertzeni zbach. But when you're looking from the Torah's perspective, right, the idea of shofar is not like something in human hands. It's something in the laws of Torah. It's something higher. Now let's look at it another way. So, say, crown God as king, right? Okay, I'll crown God as king. I'll buy him a crown. I will make a parade. I will present the crown to God. No. That's not how you do it. You blow the shofar. What about my parade? No parades. You blow the shofar. That's how you do it. How do you know how to do that? It says it in the Torah. It says it in the Torah. 1 second. God, you want me to crown it, but let me crown you the way I want to. Why are you having me crown you the way that you want to? That's not fair, right?
The various tahiyah, all the different ways you blow the shofar. That's not in the Torah, is it?
That is in the Torah.
It is.
What in the 5 books in the literal thing? Yeah, it says a trua, and the Jewish tradition is a trua has a tekiah before and after, and there's a dispute in how the trua is sounded. So there's 3 different ways. Yeah, that's why it's so important. By the way, if you don't hear shofar from somebody who is aware of Jewish law, then it's not considered as if you heard shofar, because you cannot blow shofar correctly if you're not aware of all the ancient traditions. It's not shofar. It's a musical number. Okay, yeah. So yes, they're hinted in the Torah.
Okay, I didn't know that.
They're in the oral tradition of how to understand the Torah. But yeah,
It's in the oral tradition.
the oral
not
tradition
written in
is
the five
is
books.
the oral tradition is there was a specific way to blow it, and at a certain point there was a mix-up in how to do it. So we do it three ways, and one of those three ways is right, and we don't know which ones are right till Mashiach comes.
That's
Okay.
Tekiah
Tekiah,
Shabbat.
Shram, Trua, Tekiah, Tekiah, Shram, Tekiah, Tekiah, Trua, Tekiah. We blow three sets of each one, and one of those is right, and therefore we have to blow all three. And if you don't blow all three sets, then you cannot make the blessing. Asher kichanu b'mitzvos v'tzivanu, because you may not be blowing the shofar the way God commanded us in the Torah. Okay, so when it comes to shofar, the mitzvah, that's the way we got to do it. When it comes to the Torah, no, God has a specific way. It doesn't matter what we think. It doesn't matter how we want to crown God. God has His way. The main idea in the temple is the ark. The main item in the temple is the ark. The ark is always there. The ark is still there today. We have our Jewish tradition that it's in a special room that King Solomon built.
Underneath.
Underneath.
Where the temple used to be.
Yeah. Yeah, what? Sorry?
No, I just finished that paragraph. Go ahead.
Okay. Sheboi nimtsoim. Haluches v'sefer Torah inyan haTorah. He shlemayla megeder mitzvah k'may she'inyan shefer hu mitzad haTorah. The ark is all about the Torah. The ark holds the 10 Commandments, both the broken tablets and the fixed tablets, and the Torah which Moses wrote. The ark is all about the Torah. So the temple is on a very transcendent place. It's a place that everything in the world is seen only through the eyes of the Torah. He kamay she'inyan shefer hu mitzad haTorah. Shelachein ein ze bestir al tachas habetel kiven shetekiah zu le'nei gersh mitzias adam. In the temple, we don't view people as a separate entity. We don't affirm that people are a separate entity. Everything is done straight out of the way it is in the Torah. And therefore, since in the Torah, shofar is not about us crowning God, it's about God wanting it to be done through the shofar. So therefore, the temple, which is God's place, Torah place, that's why we blow the shofar, because we're not looking at human entity. We're not looking at the human's identity. What the Gemara bounds on is that Amir Sukkah shares the Yom Tov Shavuot Shan Shchav Shabbos Zeu Inyan Shofar Kavishu B'Torah V'Naisa Ifin the Tan L'Sheni Mersacha Shaterim Hi Mersacha Elish L'Sheni Tan Kaina Achar Emra Mashu Emra V'Ifin Yisrael Eis Kuchibichu Kulachad. What is the parallel of this concept of the temple shofar, which is out of the realm of humans, so to speak? It's not with our identity. It's the way Torah is in the shofar is in the Torah. On Rosh Hashanah, we don't blow the shofar, but we read the passages in the davening about shofar, right? So why do we read the passages if we don't blow it? Because that's the way the shofar is in the Torah. The shofar, the way it is in the Torah, without mixing in human identity, is still here on Rosh Hashanah, right? Just the human part of shofar, that we don't do on Rosh Hashanah. And this is where the motif is, my tongue will repeat you. That the Torah is your word, my tongue is merely responding, repeating what you say, reflecting the level of bittul that the Jewish people are one with God. So, again, this is just taking a deeper level. It's saying there's the shofar the way it is in the Torah, and there's the shofar the way it is in the mitzvah. The way it is a mitzvah focuses on our identity, separate from God. Now, because we're separate from God, we might break Shabbos with the shofar, right? So therefore, we don't blow the shofar on Rosh Hashanah. But what we do is we read about the shofar on Rosh Hashanah. We read about it. So that's what we do on Musaf on both days. We read about the shofar, both the day we blew and the day we didn't blow. And that's symbolic. The shofar in the temple, that is not in the way of the mitzvah where we're separate from God. That is the way it is in the temple is the way that God is, the way God is fully present in other words, we feel God's perspective in the shofar. We're doing it just for God. We're not doing it because we have a mitzvah.
So, in light of the...
Yeah. Let's just finish off, because another important thing with regard to what we're studying, even when we're studying really lofty concepts like this, Sheina afilu begeder shal inyan naila. They're not even lofty. Ki im lamayla mikol geder v'tar. They're even higher than lofty. Tzrichim leida, we need to know how ma'asu ikar, the main thing is action. If everything in the Torah, action is the main thing, how much more so with regard to something which is so high? Everyone needs to affect themselves that when we carry out mitzvahs, we don't mix in our own self-awareness. It's not in the way that I'm keeping Torah mitzvahs. When we do that, once we do that, we start picking and choosing. We start viewing it in our perspective, not in God's perspective. We have to do Torah mitzvahs in a way that we do it automatically. Torah mitzvahs happen automatically without our identity, and we're not even negating our identity. So we have to reveal in ourselves that we want to do Torah mitzvahs, every Torah mitzvah, because we're one with God, and that's what God wants. That's the ultimate. So there's the lowest level is we pick and choose the mitzvahs. We do mitzvahs, what feels good to us. That's very low, because you won't even do what you need to do. You won't even do the mitzvahs you need to do. Higher than that, you negate your identity. You say, I hate this, but I will do it anyways. But the highest level is you say, I love God, therefore it doesn't matter if I hate it or love it, I'll do whatever God wants for me. That's the ultimate and the ultimate pleasure, ultimate joy.
So let's say you do.
One second, let's say,
I like the last sentence.
for example, the mitzvah tzedakah, tzedakah should be in a way that you don't feel that you are the giver. You're not thinking about how you're giving or what you have, you're just thinking about the mitzvah of God. This is a mitzvah of God, and therefore I have the opportunity to do it.
So,
All right, so there were three concepts that you wanted to talk about, yes.
well, to compare this paragraph